I figured I would go ahead and share my top 10s of basically TV seasons of shows that I've seen this year. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I'm not going to be like many of the YouTubers running around saying these are the best 10 seasons of the year, or these are the best 10 shows of the year, or these are the best 10 movies of the year. I'm not going to go like that. What I am going to do is let you guys know what my favorite seasons are that I've seen this year. And this is going to include some things you probably have not heard of before. It's also going to include some things that you probably have never even seen before, to be honest, because, yeah, I like to mix it up. I don't always watch things that are current. Sometimes I happen to be fairly far behind. Now, I will say for TV, it took me, it was kind of hard to come up with a top 10 because this year I have not had as much time to watch TV. So I've not watched as much TV. And so I, frankly, barely saw 10 seasons of television that I would consider putting into some sort of favorites list. But I was able to find 10. So let's go ahead and go through them now. There we go. Number 10 is Superman and Lois season 1. Yes, this aired 2 years ago, but you know, it's taken me a while to get through this entire season just because I've been busy. I've been watching other shows. So this certainly makes the list. I think this is probably one of the best shot, and like best directed and probably best produced live action superhero shows on broadcast television that I've ever seen. You know, even watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there is something about it that does feel a little low budget. There is nothing that feels low budget about this, even though I know for a fact that producing the show is probably relatively cheap and they probably don't have all of the money that they wish they did. Now, maybe some of that stuff can like shows up more obviously in the later seasons, kind of like with 911, how it looks infinitely cheaper now than it did in its first season. But I must say for this is pretty good. I was very impressed at how they portrayed Clark Kent as a father with Lois Lane, as well as his children. The character development for all of the characters was generally well done. And I think that they portrayed Clark Kent and his family in a very realistic way. So that impressed me. I think it'd be very difficult for me to come across something that they did in this show that I think they didn't do well. I think they did pretty much everything well in this season. So looking forward to watching the next season when I get a chance. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Next up, we have Joe Pickett. Really, this should be Joe Pickett season 2. If it's not season 2, it should be season 2. I recently finished Joe Pickett season 2 earlier this week with some other family members. I enjoyed it a lot, but it's not as high as season 1 on this list, which actually season 1 is somewhere later on this list. I enjoyed it slightly less. The reason why is, season 1 has a lot of tension in it with some internal conflict that the main character is going through. Some of that is somewhat relieved, and I think that makes this season a bit less tense. Yes, there are certain tense moments, but because the character of Joe Pickett has grown as a person, he's kind of learned how to relieve that tension in healthier ways, which is better for the character, but it also means that we have less interesting television. I think that it would have helped to have some more external tension than what Joe Pickett goes through. There's a lot of external tension in the first half of this season. But then once certain things get figured out, then stuff feels relatively chill. Like he's going after the person who did the crimes, but like it doesn't feel urgent. Like the person who did the crimes is still going to be out there, but it doesn't really feel like anything bad is going to happen anytime soon. I wish that, there are certain bad events that happen that kind of heighten the tension early on. And I wish that they were spread out throughout the season, because then at least you have Joe Pickett always looking across his shoulder, waiting for something to happen to him or loved ones, friends, family, other people in, in the town where he works. So I do think that the pacing for that could have been done a little bit better so that there was more tension. But overall, the mystery was good. The resolution was all right. I think it certainly worked. And I think it's a shame that they didn't pick it up for another season, considering that they teased the events of the next book or whatever that they would be following right at the end of this season. I think it was just very, very unfortunate. So if you haven't seen the show, I still recommend watching it. I think it's very, very good and worth watching. Also, I think Marcel Rev, one of the guys who did the cinematography for Euphoria, did some camera work for some of the episodes. And there's one shot early on in season 2 where you could really, really tell that like this is the type of high contrast, very cool, crazy shot that you would see in Euphoria. It was cool to see that in Joe Pickett. It didn't really even stand out, and you didn't really get a lot of shots like that later on, but I thought it was cool to see. So yeah, very cool. Clocking in at number 8, we have Rick and Morty season 6. I think this is like the first season where I actually waited until after the series had aired and after I actually owned the season to start watching. And usually I will watch the episodes as they air, or relatively soon after they air. But this time I decided to just watch a bunch of season 6 episodes right before season 7 aired. And I actually kind of enjoyed this. Now you can see my ratings for the episodes kind of go up and down. But I don't have a single episode rated under 8. This season kind of zeroed in and doubled down on the like goofiness of sci-fi. So there are kind of some crazy premises. But I do think that it's cool that we do get some continuity with what happened in the previous season, because part of me is like, you know, how serialized is this show going to be with like a 70 episode order where it's very clear they're trying to get to 100 episodes so that Rick and Morty can then be syndicated onto other television networks. Like, are they still going to be serialized? This season definitely said yes, but to a limited fashion, right? We got some serialized storytelling in the beginning of the season and then at the end of the season, but not much throughout. I think that there are just some episodes in here that are terrific, like Night Family. Night Family was crazy. You know, the most of these episodes I think were pretty good. People kind of hated on the season. I'm not sure why. I think it's because it was in general less serious and just kind of like silly. And like on that point, I kind of get it. But Rick and Morty is kind of a silly show. It's an animated cartoon. So of course it's not going to be super serious all the time. So I don't entirely blame them for that. But anyways, I think it's certainly good enough to put on my list. So I put this here at number 8. Now at number 7 here, for number 7, I have Loki season 2. Now, many people are putting this kind of higher up on their lists of their favorite shows of the year. I think that this show is, or at least this season, I think it's not like anything revolutionary. It's certainly well done, but people are kind of putting it like high up on the list as if it's like one of the best seasons of television of all time. I don't even know if this is like one of the best seasons of television that's aired this year. This is just on my list because I haven't seen every show that's aired on television this year. The camera work is impeccable. This feels like you're watching a Marvel movie. This actually looks more like a Marvel movie than most Marvel movies nowadays. So I was rather impressed by that. I did find some of the dialogue a bit cheesy this season, which I didn't remember seeing in the first season. Now, I will say that this year, I've kind of started getting a little bit annoyed by pretentious dialogue. Like I think it worked well in Mr. Robot, but there are just other scenarios where I just feel like it's kind of cheesy. And I will say this is by far not the most pretentious work of art that I've seen, but so many characters, I think especially Loki, they're talking and they are talking in a way that makes me feel like they want me to think that they're being profound when really they're just talking about how they're feeling or what they want the other person to do. And that just didn't really work for me as well as I think it should have. Now, for kids and teens and Tumblr girls, I think they're going to eat that stuff up and they love I've already seen some of them sharing that stuff on Instagram. So it worked for them, it worked for the target audience. But I just think personally, this would have been a better season of television if the dialogue was a bit more grounded. Also, I think the ending, while it really, really works for, you know, the character development of the character of Loki, I do kind of wish they took some greater pains to make it make more sense. You know, at the end, I don't even know, this is maybe a slight spoiler, but you see him utilize a power that you haven't seen him utilize before, and they don't explain how he got that power. I think it's a bit unfortunate. You know, they could have gone back to Loki's genetic origins and maybe fleshed out some of that backstory retroactively to explain exactly how he was able to do what he ended up doing in the end. I think that would have been a smarter move, especially since, you know, Loki is a frost giant. This isn't really a spoiler because it's literally in, I think, one of the earlier Thor movies. But Loki is a frost giant, but they don't really like show off what all of that entails, like what the abilities of frost giants are. I know in the comics, frost giants could do certain things, but in the MCU, maybe they could have made it so that that's not necessarily the case. Frost giants have even more power than that. That would have been a cool move to make, I think. So certainly a flawed season, but it's a season that certainly works. I think that it's little things that kind of build up to me going like, I don't know, but it's not anything that makes me think, oh, this is a bad season of television. This is certainly a great season of television. And this is Marvel going back to where they should be. They're nowhere near where they should be, generally, just because they haven't been consistent with their quality. But I think this is them getting closer to where they need to be quality-wise. At number 6 is Rick and Morty Season 7. And yes, I am putting this ahead of Season 6. And this is all despite the fact that I think there's an episode here. Is there an episode? No, I guess there's not. I thought there was an episode here I gave a 6 out of 10. But there are episodes here that are worse than episodes in the prior season. But I do think in general, this is a better season. Like, they balanced having goofy premises while having serialized storytelling, but also this was a far more serious season, I think. And I think that was wonderful. Like, That's Amorte. That was, an amazing, amazing episode of television. Let's see. Fear No Mort is like probably one of the darkest like endings that they've ever had to a season of television. Like, that was crazy. There was Unmort Ricken, which I think was pretty cool. Cause it kind of ends with like a, what do we do now type thing. Like, there is so much here that makes for great television. I think the prior season is funnier. People give it higher ratings, and say that it's better. That's all cool and fine, but I think it's also far more forgettable than the like very tangible, interesting and fascinating storylines that we get here. Even if some of the comedy doesn't land the way as people wish that it would, like, this is a fantastic season of Rick and Morty. And this, I think, is Rick and Morty going back to its roots, to be honest. I think that it doesn't do the comedy as well as season 6, but it does the serialized storytelling and the serious stories far better. They need to take the how they did the comedy in season 6 with how they did the serious stories and the serialized storytelling of season 7 and combine them for season 8. And I wouldn't be shocked, right? Like, there have been a bunch of seasons that they've already written. I think they're working on like season 9 or 10 now already. So like many of these episodes were just in the bag already. So they've been like improving their craft as far as writing goes, and we are not caught up to how good the writers are now. So I think we're only going to see the show improve moving forward. All right, now my choice for number 5 is probably going to shock you all, but it is The Chosen. Yes, a season of Christian television has made it to my top 10 of the year list. Now, there is certainly a factor of, this is so entertaining that, I am barely looking away. That has certainly helped this show get higher up on the list. But I will say just the stories that it's telling. Okay, first of all, the stories in the Bible are like literally some of the best stories of all time. You can go through the Old Testament, New Testament, even certain sections of the Old and New Testament and still find amazing, fantastic stories. I will say that Angel Studios doesn't really indulge in those stories a ton. Like, it does a bit. One thing I think is cool is that what it spends this season doing is fleshing out the disciples and Mary Magdalene. And it also does, it takes some pains to not really add too much to the life and story of Jesus beyond what you see in the text. Yes, it does add a few, but I do appreciate the fact that it avoids it as much as possible. We've got entire episodes just about like Peter and his wife. Like, that's awesome. You know, especially because I think they portray the characters in a very realistic and grounded way, where like if you were watching something like I don't know, like the History Channel, I think they made a mini series about Jesus one time, where I would imagine if you were watching this on like the History Channel, you would be seeing you know, how holy and righteous the disciples are, or whatever. They don't really do anything to elevate the disciples and Mary Magdalene beyond ordinary, beyond just like ordinary people, which they were. They were ordinary people. They were flawed. Some of them were doing things that were wrong, and Jesus called them to turn from their ways, and they did. And we kind of see that here. This is basically assembling the Avengers. But this is not the Avengers movie. So there are more stories from the Bible about Jesus like actually doing things. I'm assuming that we're going to get in later seasons. I only started checking out this series this year though. So great television. Oh, one more thing too is that I like how this did not air on any traditional like network or streaming service or anything. It aired on Angel Studios. And what this meant was they were able to just have extremely flexible episode lengths. Like one of my favorite episodes in this season, Jesus Loves the Little Children, was like 30 minutes long. And most of these episodes are like between 40 minutes and an hour long. Like, and the reason why this works so much is the episode has a story to tell. It tells the story, and that's the end of the story. It doesn't try to stretch things super long with like a crazy B plot or ridiculous C plot. Like, it comes here, it tells the story, and then it's out. The writing is great. You know, the acting is very well done. It almost feels like something that you could see air on like HBO or FX. Like that's how good the production value is for this. So, you know, this is one of the best seasons of television I saw this year, which is why I put it on the list. And I hope that you guys watch it if you have not checked out The Chosen at all. Now, up next, in the number 4 spot, we have Falling Skies Season 2. Now, when watching this season, I was absolutely astounded. I don't think that I have ever seen a show have this dramatic an improvement from the first season to the second season. I don't think I've ever seen a show have this much improvement. Like, season 1 wasn't bad. Right, it's like the main characters are fighting the aliens, rah. It does feel like a little wearisome and slow, I think, towards the end, just because, you know, they're fighting a very uphill battle against these monsters and aliens, and they're fighting tooth and nail to survive, but it's like all they're doing. But in this season here, there's a bit more stability, but it's not just that. We spend time with each and every single one of the main characters as they grow and have more character growth, character development, or things are changing in their lives. I don't think that I could point to a single character who doesn't change or grow. The only thing I will say is, I guess maybe, let me do a slight spoiler warning here. I will say that in season 1, it was revealed that Captain Weaver used to be an alcoholic and that his alcoholism had returned. I wish that they had kind of brought that back into season 2, especially when you have multiple occasions where people are like offering him like whiskey and stuff, and he just casually drinks it with seemingly no influence on the fact that he used to be an alcoholic and no discussion or hint that this could possibly cause him to relapse. I think that was a lapse in judgment there from the writers. But other than that, this season was fantastic. Highly recommend watching this if you haven't seen it. But even though it's not nearly as good, I recommend watching season 1 first before you dive into season 2. Now, for number 3, we've got Joe Pickett season 1. Joe Pickett season 1. This is by far one of the best seasons of television that I've seen. It's also kind of weird because this is not a show, like I've seen TVMA shows before. I don't know if this show is TVMA or TV14, I'm not sure. But even though this show has some strong language, and there's even a part where I think it shows like someone's like bare butt for a second, even though I didn't really catch it. But then someone was saying something in a mumbling tone, so my family members rewound, and then I noticed the bare butt. But this actually feels like one of the cleanest and almost one of the most wholesome seasons of television that I've seen all year. Like, the main character, his relationship with his wife, I think was very nice. Although, you know, certainly I wouldn't expect the most normal thing in the world, because Joe Pickett at his core, especially in this season, is a very, very broken character. But, you know, still very, very cool relationship that they have. I think that they portrayed the family in a relatively realistic way, considering everything that was going on. I like how there's like a labyrinth of corruption that the main character uncovers, but they're not done in like a goofy way. It's not going to be like, oh, you know, if you tell, we're going to blow your head off. Like, we do get some realistic threats where if someone is going to, you know, expose something sensitive, then, you know, there's an expectation that something will happen, but it's not something goofy where it's like, oh, if you expose who we are, we'll kill you and your whole family. Because there's a realistic understanding that if you know that someone's corrupt, you need more than a feeling. You know hard proof. And it can be hard to get that hard proof sometimes. So there's a thing of like, oh, well, who would ever believe you, right, about this crazy theory? Also, I like how the ending of the season is not perfect. Like, not all the bad guys are caught and found and put to justice. Like, I think that is very realistic as well. So, great season of television. This was a very, very fun watch. I highly recommend watching this. Now, the next two seasons, though, are very, 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 very high on my recommendation list. Like, these are things that I very, very strongly recommend people check out. Number 2 is season 1 of Luther. This is a fantastic show. I will say that there is a plot twist here that just feels kind of weird and out of left field. They should have left more clues that it was going to happen, because it almost feels detached from the rest of the season. But it's not the main plot at all. It's just like a wrench in certain characters' plans. So it's not that much to detract from the series, but this was fantastic. Like, the main character has some very severe anger issues. I think were portrayed in a very realistic way. You know, he has a very strained relationship with his, I suppose, separated wife, I think would be a fair way to put it. All the other characters, I think, kind of like treat him realistically, where it's like, you know, they're kind of scared, which makes a lot of sense, but also he's very competent and very good at his job, so they keep him around and they want to be friends with him. Like that delicate, like, dancing, that delicate act of like not trying to set him off, but also like cooperating with him well, and also trying to get him help and get him to improve his behavior. Like, all of that was very, very, very well done. But on top of that, not only all of that, but this show is very, very, very well shot. The way that it was shot reminds me so much of Mr. Robot and what's the guy's name? Sam Esmail. I wish I knew any sort of link between how they did the cinematography between this and Mr. Robot, because this feels just like a continuation of Mr. Robot. If you told me that this was Sam Esmail's next project, I would believe you. Like that. And the soundtrack also ages pretty well, so it doesn't feel like I'm watching a show that is like 13 years old. It feels like a show that aired last year, but I didn't catch it because I didn't have TNT at the time. Like, this was fantastic television. Also, they do a good job of having a serialized story while having individual mysteries in each individual episode. I think that was cool as well. So, definitely recommend watching this. But of course, y'all know what the crown jewel is going to be. Y'all know it's going to be my number 1 season. It's going to be this one. Succession Season 4. This show is going to be remembered as one of the greatest series of all time. I'm quite sure. There's just so much here in this show. It's fantastic. At this point in the show, every single episode feels like an impeccable piece of character work, which is outstanding. You almost get glimpses of like what things might be like if all the siblings got along, which just like dips in and out throughout the season in a tantalizing way. And I think it's kind of cool because these characters are not really great people. I think they certainly have the potential to be great people, but it's a mixture of them being broken and also just not having the greatest character on their own, that just causes them to not be great people. But I do like how many bones they throw us of, these siblings could have a great time together if they, put aside their differences and their competitive spirits and just decided to behave like siblings. Like, I love that because there are always going to be people who are going to be like, man, I wish the siblings got along. I wish that they teamed up together and did things together and kicked off their own initiatives. And here it's like, you can't say that the writers didn't give you a little bit of that. Like, at least 2 times the characters team up and they're like, yeah, we're going to do this thing together as siblings. So, they do throw us enough of that so that we're not sitting around at the end of the season pining away and being like, man, I just wish they got along, man. Like they did. But also it shows afterwards why they can't get along, which I think makes people wish that they all worked together a little bit less. And I think it kind of like is better than them just having them be at odds the entire season. And then having the maker of the show being like, man, of course these characters wouldn't work together. What makes you think they'd work together? Instead, the writers show us why they couldn't work together. That was fantastic. Also, just towards the end of the season, like the way that some of the stuff is shot, there were multiple sequences throughout the series where like it was extensive long takes that because it was shot on film, they had to use multiple cameras. But there were multiple sequences in this season where it was a long take of at least like 5 or 10 minutes, sometimes traversing like, corridors and hallways and various rooms. Like, this is a very, very wonderful show. Also, I highly recommend if you have Max, or if you've bought it on iTunes like I have, check out the stuff at the end of the episode. They have these really cool like featurettes that dive into how they did some of the stuff behind the scenes. You're really going to want to see that, at least for like some of these episodes in season 4. Very, very cool. Also, of course, the acting, the music, the writing, all of that stuff is on point and firing at all cylinders, and on overdrive, frankly, in this season. So they really end the season on a high note. And I'm grateful that they did that. No coincidence also that they, it's great. I'm super happy that the end of the series, when the story naturally would have concluded, I was thinking about this recently. This is the type of show where, like, with the plot, they could have made this last 8 seasons instead of 4. There would be a point where it sort of feel like it was spinning its wheels, but there's enough conflict in between all the characters where they certainly could have kept the show going for 8 seasons, but they decided not to because they didn't want the show to just be going into a cycle over and over again and nothing really happening beyond that cycle. It breaks the cycle, shows us what happens next. It's very, very cool. So if you have not seen this show, I would highly, highly, highly recommend watching it. Especially since, if you are a more conscientious observer, perhaps would be one way to put it, and you don't like, shows with tons of like inappropriate stuff like sex scenes, or you don't like, a lot of gory stuff. There's very, 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 very little sexual content throughout the show, and like absolutely none throughout this entire season. So the only thing that you have to worry about if you like are not comfortable watching certain things because of the content of them, the only thing you have to worry about is a gratuitous amount of language throughout the entire series. But other than that, nothing really much to worry about. So if that's something you're worried about because it's an HBO show, completely understand. Not all TVMA shows have a bunch of sex scenes though. So this is not one of those shows. Highly recommend watching the show. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. If you're a fan of good TV, you are going to love this. This is all I have for my top 10 seasons of TV. Now, this is not the best seasons of TV that have aired in 2023. It's just my favorite. I'm not going to pretend that I've seen every single thing so I can give you a definitive list, but this is just like my definitive list for what is my favorite, not what's the best. Now, if you guys disagree with me strongly on any of the series that I've mentioned or any of the seasons that I've mentioned, certainly feel free to leave a comment down below. There's so much TV out there. And sometimes I'm like, is there a drought of good television? But then I see a few trailers and I'm like, nope. So if there's a show or a season of of television that I have not seen that you think I should see, or just something that you think I've missed, let me know in the comment section below. I have a massive list of shows I plan on getting to, and I am more than happy to add even more shows to that list.